Hey everyone, so today we're going to talk about 5 ways to improve your high guard or high blocking in swordsmanship. So for the people who are new to the channel, I'm Bug and I've got a little over 4 years of experience in historic East Asian swordsmanship, specialising in the Korean Joseon dynasty form, Jedok Geom. And so in my years of training, these are 5 mistakes that I see in high blocking or high guard when receiving a downwards cut to the head. And these range from very rookie beginner mistakes all the way up to fine nuances to make your high guard better. Now, if you are taught differently in your school or your club, then do it as your master instructs you or however you find it to work best against a non-compliant opponent in sparring or training. Alrighty, so let's get right into it. So for the first mistake, as a very rookie mistake, is low blocking. And what I mean by that is that a high guard should protect your head from a downward strike. And you see some people block like this. And as you can see, the top of my head is still very much exposed. And so the high guard hasn't actually achieved its intended purpose. My head will encounter the opponent's sword before my sword, which is supposed to be protecting my head, will do. So how you fix this is just make sure that the sword is actually above your head when you do a high guard to block against an overhead strike. Now the second mistake that I see is hand blocking. And what I mean by hand blocking is that a lot of people block like this. And as you can see over my head are my hands. And so my hands will encounter the opponent's sword rather than my sword. And it's still better than my head because it's not going to be life-threatening or lethal, but I may lose some fingers. And in sparring, it may lead to some serious finger injuries. So a better way to do this would be to block so that about 1/3 of the way across the sword is over my head. And that way the opponent's sword encounters my sword and not any part of my body. Now the third thing that I see is not really a mistake, but it can be improved. And that is flat blocking. So you see a lot of people block straight across flat like this. And it does its job and it works. But as soon as I see an opponent do that when I'm going for an overhead strike, rather than going for the overhead strike, I pull the sword back in and I go for a thrust to the head. And that way then I bypass their guard and it's very efficient in getting a thrust to the head. So how you can mitigate that is by doing what I call a forwards high guard. So here the blade is at a 45-degree angle. It's halfway between going to the side and going to the front. And so it's still protecting my head, but if the opponent tries to close in to go for a thrust, I just move the tip to the midline and boop, and I have stabbed them back and stopped their offense. Now it's not applicable in all cases, but I tend to use this as my default high guard because I find it to be as effective in most places that you can do a high guard and have more advantages. The fourth mistake that I see is people not rolling the guard. So I see some people take the block and they take the hit really hard on and they don't move from here. And in sparring, then that's a lot of force being transmitted into you, your arms, your legs, and it can hurt quite a bit. But if these were real swords, it'd be even worse because the 2 sharp edges would dig into each other and cause a lot of damage to each other. And edge damage in the best case is money spent repairing it, and in the worst case, it's a broken sword. So how do we mitigate this? We mitigate this by rolling the guard. So what I mean by that is when you take the hit, then roll the sword so that you have the minimum edge contact and force on the sword, and use that force from your opponent's strike to power into your cut. That way then you can effectively get a counter out of their strike much quicker than you could if you took it hard on, and also you save your sword, your arms. It's just a better way to do swordsmanship. Now the 5th mistake that I see with the high guard is that people chase the draw, not the strike. And what I mean by that is it's when you do the high guard. And so often I draw the sword back and people start going into high guard. And as soon as I see that happening, then I'm not going to finish the downwards cut. From here, I'm just going to change into a horizontal cut and attack them where they're open. So rather than drawing into high guard as your opponent draws back, then as soon as their tip starts to move forward and you see the line that they're taking, that's the moment when you should go into high guard, because you know it's very unlikely for it to become something else. Now people say, oh, but then you'll be too slow. And I don't think so, because the motion from your defensive stance into high guard is a much quicker motion than from drawing back and into a cut. So you should be able to see it, and you should be able to track your opponent with good reflexes and plenty of training. Now you may not always want to do these 5 improvements to the high guard. Sometimes there is a reason for doing a flat block because you can have a better counterattack. Or you may not want to chase the tip because you can go and feint them from the draw instead. There's many reasons why you wouldn't do a high guard like this, but I think that these should be in your arsenal, and from a basics point of view, then this is a good progression to improving your high guard or your high block so that you are ready for sparring and you can take on most opponents quite well. So whatever level you're at, I hope you found this video interesting, and with that, I'll see you next time.